The courtroom buzzed with its usual tension. Lawyers flipping through papers, spectators whispering quietly, and the distant echo of a gavel in another room. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat tall at the bench, her expression calm and focused. It felt like just another case, another day in court. At least that's what she thought. The bailiff called out, "The state of Louisiana versus James Anderson." Eleanor shifted slightly, her hands resting on the polished oak bench. Her eyes skimmed the file. Assault, robbery, resisting arrest. That familiar weight settled in her chest. Another life caught in the gears of the system. Then the defendant was brought in, and everything changed. The man standing before her, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wasn't just any defendant. He was James Anderson. Her James. Her throat tightened as memories surged forward. Long summer days riding bikes down dusty roads in Hammond, Louisiana. Late-night talks beneath the magnolia tree in her backyard. The promises they made as kids, to always have each other's backs, no matter what. But the man standing before her wasn't the boy she once knew. His shoulders sagged, his face worn by time and trouble. Still, his eyes, those deep, familiar eyes, hadn't changed. Eleanor's grip on the gavel slipped. For the first time in her career, she hesitated. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. James looked up, and for a second, recognition passed between them. Then he looked away, head bowed. Everyone in the courtroom was waiting. Eleanor forced herself to speak. "Mr. Anderson, you're charged with assault and robbery. How do you plead?" His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her heart pounded. She wanted to pause everything to ask what had happened, how they ended up here on opposite sides of justice. But she was a judge now. She had a job to do. "Proceed," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. As the prosecutor launched into their opening remarks, Eleanor's thoughts drifted back to a time long before black robes and courtrooms. She and James grew up in two different worlds on opposite sides of Hammond, not separated by miles, but by the unspoken lines drawn by a segregated town. Her family lived in a modest one-story home with a white picket fence. James's house sat at the end of a dirt road, weathered and surrounded by fields. Their friendship had never been expected. It began by accident. She had wandered too far and found James fishing at the creek, his line stuck in the reeds. She offered to help. That simple moment grew into years of secret adventures and shared hopes. Lying under the stars one night, James had asked her, "Eleanor, you ever think about leaving here? For real? Going someplace where people don't stare just 'cause we're together?" She had laughed, brushing it off. But James was serious. Even back then, he understood the world better than most. It didn't always make space for people like him. Despite the whispers, the side glances, and the anger from both sides, their bond deepened. Still, the pressure never went away. Then one day it ended. It was the summer before high school. Her father had caught them sitting on the porch. His voice had been sharp, cold. Eleanor inside. Now, she'd hesitated. James stood frozen. "Go on," he said quietly, already knowing what came next. "I'll see you around." But they didn't. Her father forbid her from seeing him, and not long after, James's family moved away. Eleanor buried herself in school. Her dreams pushed her beyond Hammond, to law school, to a career built on justice. But she never forgot James, the boy who first showed her what bravery looked like. Now, sitting at the bench, she wondered what had happened to him after that porch. His record told a quiet story: petty theft, loitering, small charges. Nothing that pointed to violence. But here he was, and she had to decide how to do her job while facing the past she thought she'd left behind. But then again, how much of a person's life could you really understand from a few lines on a rap sheet? The prosecutor's voice snapped Eleanor back to the present. He was laying out the charges. James had allegedly assaulted a store clerk during a robbery at a convenience store in Baton Rouge. The clerk had minor injuries, and the register had been cleaned out. Police caught James a few blocks away, with the stolen cash supposedly still on him. Eleanor watched James closely as the prosecutor spoke. His posture was slouched, hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. Had he really done it? Or was there more to the story than what the prosecution claimed? When the courtroom broke for lunch, Eleanor returned to her chambers, trying to make sense of the whirlwind in her mind. Her assistant, Margaret, approached with a concerned look. "Judge Hayes, are you all right? You seemed a little off in court," Margaret asked gently. Eleanor hesitated. Should she tell her the truth, that she knew the defendant? That the man on trial had once been her best friend? It felt unprofessional, too personal. So she simply shook her head. "I'm fine," she said. "Just a lot on my mind." But she wasn't fine. How could she be when the past she had tried so hard to leave behind was sitting just feet away, waiting on her judgment? When court resumed, the gallery was full. Reporters scribbled notes. The clerk organized paperwork. And the prosecutor, Richard Powell, a sharp, clean-cut man, stood ready to present the state's case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Powell began, his voice steady and authoritative, "this case is about violence. A man walked into a store, attacked an innocent clerk, and stole money. The evidence will prove James Anderson is guilty." Eleanor felt a knot in her stomach. His tone was cold, clinical, like James was nothing more than a statistic. She glanced at James again. He hadn't moved, his eyes still locked on the table in front of him. Then the defense attorney, Lisa Porter, stood. Young, but poised, she delivered her opening statement with quiet confidence. "The prosecution wants you to believe this case is simple, but it's not," she said. "My client, James Anderson, has insisted he's innocent from the start. We'll show you that the events of that night don't line up with what the state claims." The first witness was called, a store clerk who had been working that night. He testified that a man matching James's description entered the store, argued with the cashier, then jumped the counter. His version of events was detailed, but something about it felt too smooth, too rehearsed. Lisa rose for cross-examination. "Calm, precise. Mr. Chambers, you said the attacker was wearing a red hoodie. Is that correct?" "Yes," the clerk answered. "Did you see his face clearly?" "Not really. It was dark, and he had the hood up." Lisa nodded, pacing slowly. "So, you can't say for certain who the attacker was?" "Well, no, not definitively." "No further questions," Lisa said, cutting him off. Eleanor noticed James shift slightly, his shoulders lifting just a bit, as if the exchange had given him the smallest sliver of hope. Next, they played surveillance footage from the store. The video was grainy and dim, showing a hooded figure entering, moving quickly, and reaching over the counter. But the details were vague. The prosecution argued the person was James, but the poor quality made it hard to be sure. Eleanor leaned forward, watching every frame. Could this really be James? The video ended abruptly, leaving the story unfinished. James's defense rested on an alibi. He said he had been walking home from a friend's place when a robbery occurred. But the friend refused to testify, scared of the blowback from the neighborhood. Lisa argued that fear didn't mean James was lying, but Eleanor could see the uncertainty creeping into the jury's faces. As the trial continued, Eleanor felt the burden of her role pressing down. She was supposed to be objective, the voice of reason and fairness. But how could she be when the man on trial had once been her world? The boy she used to ride bikes with, the one who dreamed of escaping Hammond, was now fighting for his freedom, and she was the one who held the gavel. When court adjourned for the day, Eleanor remained at the bench, her fingers lightly tracing the wood of the gavel. She didn't move. She wanted to talk to James, to look him in the eye and ask, "What happened to you?" But she knew she couldn't. Any contact with James outside the courtroom would put the entire case, and her career, in jeopardy. Still, as she watched him being led out in chains, Eleanor's resolve began to crack. She had always believed in the justice system, in its power to uncover the truth. But for the first time, she found herself wondering if the truth was something it could ever truly reach. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as the trial reached a critical point. It was now the defense's turn to present its case. Lisa Porter stood and called her first key witness, Officer Daniel Harris, the man who had arrested James. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. If there were weaknesses in the prosecution's case, they might show up here. Officer Harris, a stocky man with a rough edge, took the stand. Lisa approached him with calm, deliberate steps. "Officer Harris," she began, "you were the arresting officer in this case, correct?" "That's right," he answered curtly. "You stated in your report that Mr. Anderson was walking 2 blocks from the scene of the robbery when you detained him. Is that accurate?" "Yes." "And what made you believe he was the suspect?" "He matched the description. Black male, mid-40s, wearing dark clothing." Lisa's brow lifted slightly. Dark clothing. But the suspect in the surveillance footage was described as wearing a red hoodie. "Did you find a red hoodie in Mr. Anderson's possession?" Harris hesitated. "No, but he could have ditched it." Lisa stepped closer. "Could have. Did you or any other officer search the area for this supposed hoodie?" His jaw tightened. "No, we didn't have time. He was picked up quickly." Lisa didn't let up. "So, to clarify, you arrested Mr. Anderson based solely on a vague description, with no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene?" The silence that followed said more than any words. Eleanor glanced at the jury. A few jurors exchanged uneasy looks. Lisa continued. "Did Mr. Anderson say anything during the arrest?" "He said he was innocent." "And did you investigate that claim at all? Or did you assume guilt based purely on how he looked?" Harris stiffened. "I followed procedure." Lisa echoed his words with a touch of disbelief. "Protocol. No further questions, Your Honor." There was a low murmur in the courtroom as Harris stepped down. His credibility was clearly shaken. Eleanor's heart pounded. This trial had become more than just about guilt or innocence. It was exposing cracks in a system that seemed far too ready to pass judgment. Next, the defense made an unexpected move. Lisa called an expert witness, a forensic analyst who had reviewed the store surveillance footage. The analyst explained that based on the figure's height and build, it was impossible to definitively identify the person as James. More troubling, the footage's timestamp had been altered, raising serious questions about its reliability. The prosecution dismissed the testimony as speculation, but the effect was clear. Doubt was creeping into the jury box, and Eleanor could feel the shift in the room. As the day wound down, James chose to take the stand. Lisa had warned him of the risks, but he was firm. He wanted to speak. He stood, the soft clink of chains accompanying each step to the witness stand. When he spoke, his voice was low but steady, raw with emotion. "I've made mistakes," James told the jury. "I've gone down the wrong path, trusted the wrong people. But I didn't do this. That night, I was just walking home. I wasn't bothering anyone. The cops stopped me and decided I looked like the guy they were after." His voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "My whole life, I've had a fight to be seen as more than just what I look like. And I'm tired. I just want the truth to matter." Eleanor's throat tightened. His words weren't just a defense. They were a plea. A call to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with humanity. She looked toward the jury. Their faces were a mixture of emotions, doubt, empathy, confusion. This trial was no longer just about evidence. It had become a test of conscience, a challenge to look past assumption and bias. Eleanor knew, then, that her job wasn't only to uphold the law. It was to ensure that justice truly meant something. The final day of the trial arrived heavy with tension. Both sides delivered their closing arguments with precision. The prosecutor leaned on the circumstantial evidence, urging the jury to trust the system, to believe the process. But Lisa asked them to look deeper, to question the gaps in the case, to see the human being at the heart of it. Eleanor sat quietly, listening to every word, her face unreadable. Her mind was racing, but her role remained clear. She couldn't influence the jury. That wasn't her job. But if their verdict left any gray area, she would have the final word. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her like never before. The jury deliberated for hours. The courtroom emptied and refilled as people stretched, whispered quietly, and waited. James sat still, hands tightly clasped, eyes cast down. He hadn't looked at Eleanor once since the trial began, and she couldn't blame him. What could she possibly say to make any of this right? Finally, the bailiff stepped forward to announce that the jury had reached a verdict. The room fell silent. A hush swept over the crowd as the foreperson stood, a small slip of paper shaking in her hand. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus James Anderson, we find the defendant, the pause stretched on forever. Not guilty. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even scattered applause. Eleanor raised her gavel, restoring order with a sharp rap. James's shoulders slumped, the tension in his frame loosening like a thread pulled free. But his face gave nothing away. He had won his freedom, but at a cost only he could truly feel. Eleanor addressed the court, her voice steady. The jury has spoken. Mr. Anderson, you're free to go. Court is adjourned. As the room cleared, Eleanor stayed behind, watching James sign his release papers. For a moment, she thought he might leave without looking back. But then he turned. He approached her slowly, stopping a few feet from the bench. The room was nearly empty now, just a few clerks tidying up and Margaret gathering up files. You don't owe me anything, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But I gotta ask, why didn't you say anything? You knew me. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. The words didn't come easily. Because I couldn't, she said. I had to stay neutral. If I'd said something, it could have put the whole case at risk. James studied her for a long moment. His expression flickered, hurt, understanding, maybe both. Fair, he said softly. That's the thing, Eleanor. The world's never been fair. Not for people like me. She nodded, eyes dropping to the bench beneath her hands. You're right. I wish I'd done more back then. I wish I could have done more now. James sighed, some of the tension in his body giving way. We were kids. We didn't know any better. But you know better now, don't you? I do, she said, her voice steady. And I'm sorry. He gave a faint nod. Then he turned and walked away, his back straight as he passed through the courthouse doors. Eleanor sat there alone, the echo of his words settling into the silence. She had followed the law, upheld procedure, but this trial had shown her something more. Justice wasn't just about facts and verdicts. It was about people, about lives caught in systems built long before they were born. For Eleanor, it was a turning point, a reminder that her seat on the bench wasn't just a place of authority, but a chance to make a real difference. As she stepped out into the evening, the sun sinking low behind the courthouse, long shadows stretched across the stone steps. She paused and made a silent promise to herself. She couldn't change the past, but she could do everything in her power to make sure the future held more than empty promises of fairness. It wouldn't be easy. It might not even be possible, but she owed it to James and to herself to try.